Hey, thank you for tuning into my channel. It's Miss Kiki, and we're about to roll into part one of Jeezy's Adversity for Sale. You gotta believe his new book that just dropped here recently. So I'm gonna be starting at chapter one. Jumped off the porch. I can't even front. I started out as a thief. At first, it was little things like stealing sodas out of the soda machine in front of this old mechanic shop down the block from my grandmother's house. This was back in the 1980s, and back then, if your arm was skinny and long enough, you could push open the little trap door and reach up into the machine and pull the cans loose. I used to run that little play all the time, at least until my arm got a little too big. I found that one out the hard way too. Reached up into the machine, and the next thing I knew, I was stuck, and they had to call for some adults to come and help me get free. I was embarrassed as hell about that, but I just know my grandmother felt a whole lot worse. She was my dad's mom, Miss Mattie Pickett, and she was a fixture in the community. At church every Sunday, worked at the local Head Start program, and ran numbers on the side. She'd had 15 kids, including my dad, and even though she didn't have much, she was always taking in family. I stayed with her on and off through the years, and I wasn't the only one. There'll always be aunties and uncles and cousins and cousins and cousins coming in and out. If you ever needed some hot food and a place to stay, Miss Mattie Pickett was there. You might be sleeping six to a bed, but you'd have a bed. And you might not have much to eat, but you'd have some food. Well, when she came and got me that day, she didn't pull me down the block by the ear the way you see old ladies do the little kids in the cartoons, but that's how it felt to me. I'll never forget that tight look on her face when she walked me home either. Hot as hell, but playing it cool in front of the neighbors, hissing at me under her breath like I can stand for a whole lot, but what I won't stand for are liars and thieves. Needless to say, that was the last time I ran that little play. But that wasn't the only thing that I took from that shop. The shop was ran by this old head, Mr. Russell. He was sort of like a mechanic slash salvage man slash shopkeeper slash bank, and he was one of the first entrepreneurs I ever met. He started with a backyard auto repair shop, expanded into a lot next door, and built himself a little real estate empire. Matter of fact, he was so well established on the north side of Hawkinsville, Georgia, that my grandmother's neighborhood was named after him. They called it Russell City. For the most part, everybody in my family is from Hawkinsville. My grandmother, my dad, my mom, her mom, and all of my aunts and uncles and all that. And Hawkinsville is tiny. I'm talking 4,500 people on a good day, and even fewer back then. As you can imagine, there's not much to it. Couple of highways, some factories, a little town main street, some fast food joints, a bunch of churches and liquor stores, and that's about it. But compared to all of the other little towns around there, Hawkinsville is big because it's the Pulaski's county seat. Now I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I know what all that entails, but for the little part of South Georgia, Hawkinsville is the hub. That's where the regional hospital is, the county schools, the courthouse, the sheriff's office. So if you live in any of those little surrounding towns, you got some business to handle, you're coming to Hawkinsville to get it done. As small as Hawkinsville is, though, it's big enough to have a hood. Put it this way, you might have to know. Put it this way, you might have to know what you're looking for to even find Hawkinsville on the map. But it does have a Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard. It's just a short stretch of road on the north side of town, not far from where my grandmother stayed. But remember when Chris Rock said, "I don't give a fuck where you are in America. If you're on Martin Luther King Boulevard, that's some violence going down." Yeah, well, even in Hawkinsville, that was true. Old Mr. Russell had this car radio. He had a lot of shit, really. Old broken down cars, refrigerators, TVs, and whatever else. And he just sit in his car and watch you dig through it all until you found whatever it was you were looking for, and then he'd quote you a price. But all that stuff Mr. Russell had, what I really wanted was that car radio. This was the late 80s. And the fastest thing you could have in your car back then, and the flyest thing you could have in your car back then was an Alpine 2 knob pull out tape deck. Oh, Mr. Russell wasn't an Alpine, but it was that style that was good enough for me. And I knew if I was smart and I played it right, I just might be able to get it for free. At that time, old Mr. Russell was sort of trying to look out for me. I was only about 11 or 12 years old, but I already developed a rep as a troublemaker. And because he and my grandmother were close, at a certain point, she asked him to take me under his wing. I guess the way they were looking at it, the more time I spent at old Mr. Russell's shop, the less time I had to get into trouble in the streets. I started going over to old Mr. Russell's spot pretty much every day after school, helping him out here and there. And then whenever what had to be done was done, I'd pull up a chair next to his and keep an eye on the shop while he slept. That's when the trouble started to brew. Hours and hours would go by, days sometimes with nobody stopping by, and I'd just sit there with my eyes on the prize. He kept the radio on the shelf high on the wall next to a bunch of other junk collecting dust. The way I was looking at it, he must not have cared about it all that much. Otherwise, he would have kept it somewhere else to protect it and keep it safe. But that radio was everything to me, so I made a plan. For the next few days, whenever I go over there, I'd wait for him to fall asleep and then I'd move my chair closer and closer to the shelf. I took my time with it so it didn't seem like suddenly one day my chair was in a whole other place. Then, when I finally felt like I'd gotten close enough, I'd watch his eyes to see if he could see me. I make more I make my move when I was sure he was asleep. I made sure to wear a baggy black shirt that day. Then, just like always, I stopped by his spot after school to see if he needed any help. And just like always, I straightened a few things up here and there, and then he settled into our chairs and I waited for him to fall asleep. In the end, it wasn't all that deep. When the time came, I stood up on my chair, grabbed the radio, stuffed it under my shirt, and walked right out the door. I doubted old Mr. Russell even cracked an eye. When I got back to my grandmother's house, I went straight to my room. I went straight to the room I was staying in and cleared some space on the dresser and pulled the radio out from under my shirt. I didn't care that it wasn't an Alpine. It looked great. And I felt like I'd really pulled something off. I made my plan, executed the plan, and I hadn't got caught. That was big to me. And then after a few weeks of messing with it and trying to get it to work, that knockoff Alpine wasn't enough. I wanted the real deal. Even more than that, though, in my grandmother's tiny ass house in that tiny ass town without a dollar to my name, I really just wanted more. I never went back to Mr. Russell's shop after that. I don't know if he ever noticed the radio was missing or if he even cared. I never heard anything about it if he did. What's crazy is that when I look back on that incident, I bet old Mr. Russell probably would have given me that radio if I'd asked. Real shit. And that's a real lesson too. Before you take something from someone, just ask because they just might give it to you and you will maintain the relationship. But once you take something from someone, that's it. Even if eventually you come clean and give it back, the damage to the relationship is done and you will both have to live with that. Of course, I wasn't thinking like that back then. Mr. Russell had something I wanted, so I took it. I care more about the radio than the relationship. And the crazy thing is, I was still so young, it would be years before I even had a car. I don't remember the day we landed at Nawa Airport, but I know for a fact that I wasn't in a good mood. I never liked leaving Georgia. I had family in the Ville. I had friends. I knew the culture and the people. who to fuck with, who, and who to avoid. And even when I was getting in trouble, I felt safe. Almost like, what's the worst thing can happen to me here? Even the sheriff seemed cool to me. Not cool, but cool like he had a good relationship with my grandmother and we were all on the first name basis. So I couldn't imagine him ever locking me up no matter what I did. I guess what I'm saying is Hawkinsville was home. Anokawa, Okinawa. On the other hand, shit, Okinawa was Japan. I hope I'm saying that right. Okin, Okinawa, Japan. And coming straight out of South Georgia, I didn't know a damn thing about that. My dad was in the Marines, and we were always moving when I was young. That's how I ended up being born in Columbia, South Carolina, even though the rest of my family was from the Ville. But no matter where we were, Fort Gordon in Augusta, in North Carolina, or K Bay in Hawaii, I always gravitated toward the bad kids because that's what I knew. Looking back, I can see how all my acting out was really rooted in some combinations of me trying to get attention, trying to get things to make myself feel better about a fucked up situation, and just trying to survive. In the hood, I didn't feel out of place. Everybody was going through something, and dysfunctional families were the norm. Shit, in the hood, being bad was almost a good thing because it was a way to fit in. But the base wasn't the hood. And everything we show up somewhere new, every time we show up somewhere new, I always feel out of place. It was one thing when we were still in the South and the hood was just a few hours away. But Hawaii, Japan, come on, I'm black. I'm country. I've just got a hood mentality. And I'm on the other side of the world in the way behind all the other kids in school. They're rushing home for dinner at 6 o'clock sharp, doing chores, pursuing interests like violin and flute. When I know about things like shoplifting and the movies with cussing in them and how to get with girls, I was one of the kids other parents warned their kids about. And I definitely didn't know a damn thing about no flute. I always felt like the odd man. So I'll fall back on what I excelled at. And then I'll go looking for my tribe. It never took me long to find it either. No matter where we were in the world, give me a couple of days on a new base and I'll be running with a few other kids that were stealing money out their mama purse, taking liquor from their dad's stash, getting in the fight, smoking cigarettes and paying more attention to playing ball and getting girls than anything going on in school. And no one and one way or another, whenever we went, I always ended up being the leader of the pack. In Okinawa, I made the whole okay, and I hope I'm saying this right, y'all. I'm gonna have to after this. I'm gonna have to ask Google how you say it. Okinawa. I made the whole island my playground, and I ran well. The first little scheme I cooked up was at an exchange. Now, if you don't know anything about military life, the exchange is basically the base mall. That's where you go to get all the things you might want from back home: clothes, furniture, electronics, TVs, music, movies, all that. Once we got settled in, one of the first things I noticed was that the security at the Camp Butler Exchange was really, really lax. So I went to work. The first thing I stole was the Ghetto Boys Grip It on the other level. This was back when you could still get all the new music on cassettes. So I just slipped the tape in my pocket and walked right out the door. I ran that play a couple of times and then I decided to level up. Back then, if you really wanted to go fresh, it was all about the cross colors with the high tech Jodeci boots. That was the look. Of course, my family couldn't afford all that. So one day I hit exchange with an old shopping bag tucked under my shirt and an old receipt. I took the bag into the dressing room, put all the clothes I wanted in it, threw that old receipt on top and walked right out the door. I ran that place so many times while we were there. I was voted best dressed in school and I never spent a dime. But it was during my solo missions off base that I really did my thing. I used to bike all over the islands, checking out the culture and taking it all in. It was so different from home. The food, the way people dress, the cars, the language. Every once in a while, I come across these young guys in their early 20s, and they were always driving these old Cadillacs with their hair slicked back and their arms all tatted up. They seemed so cool to me. One of my homies over there was this cat Cole. He was half black and half Japanese, and when I asked him about them, he told me all about the yakuza, which is like the Japanese mob. Cole put me into a lot of things, and his mom was the one who really opened my mind to Japanese cuisine. I used to go over to his place all the time, and he'd bring out all these sushi rolls and rice balls and teach me about everything she was serving. Of course, back in the hood, no one knew anything about eating raw fish. But there I was on the other side of the world soaking up game. Still, somebody should have warned the Japanese about me. Coming from where I'm from, you can't leave your clothes out drying on the line without worrying about somebody might come by and snatch them up. But Japanese culture is all about honor and integrity. So the level of trust is through the roof. In the States, especially as a young black male, you walk in the store and it feel like all eyes are on you. But when I was in Japan, sometimes I'd walk into a shop and it'll feel like no one was even watching the store, much less me. So it didn't take long before I found this one electronic shop and got him a brand new, sleek and slim Sony Walkman that looked like it was 20 years ahead of the big chunky ones you could get back home. Fit right in my pocket too. So I walked straight out the door, hopped on my bike, and cruised right on back to the base with no problems at all. A few months later, we were back in the Ville visiting family while my dad was on leave, and one of my older cousins noticed the headphones hanging around my neck. Yo, let me see those. I handed over my Walkman, and as soon as he saw it, he was like, God damn, little Jay, where you get that? I told him about the electronic shops in Japan and how everything over there was so space age, futuristic shit. He turned it over in his hand, studying it. You think you can get some walkie talkies like this? Yeah, I told him. How much you got? He laughed. How about you get them first and then we can figure out the price? Shit, say less, right? The next time I took my bike off the base, I rode around looking for another electronic shop and then got them again. But instead of going right back to the base, I just kept going. Next shop, same plate. Next shop, same plate. And on until finally, when I got back to the base, I had maybe 5 or 6 sets. I packed everything up, slapped the Georgia address on it, and sent it out. A few weeks later, my cousin called and he was hyped. Yo, these walkie talkies are the shit. Can you give me some more? I laughed. You're feeling them, huh? He was like, man, what? I'll take as many as you can get. When I asked him about the price, he said, shit, it's whatever. You tell me. Just keep them coming and we'll figure it out. For the next year or so, that's what I did. In the end, I probably made a few G's off that little scheme and all in. And it wasn't just Walkmen and walkie talkies either. It was whatever I could get my hands on. You could say that was my first business. I was a Japanese electronics importer, exporter, and everything I carried, I stole. I never I never did get caught off base, but at a certain point, the guards at the exchange finally smartened up and grabbed me one time when I was trying to walk out the door. I tell you what, the military doesn't play when it comes to thieves. And for a minute there, it looked like they might even try to court martial my dad. After that, my dad sent me home, my little sister and me back home. After that, my dad sent my mom, my little sister, and me back home. They weren't happy about that, but it was fine by me. I felt so out of place. I couldn't wait to get back to the hood. That's the end of Chapter 1, Jumped Off the Porch. Thank you for tuning in to my channel. Stay tuned for chapter 2 coming soon. Bye. Like and subscribe if you haven't already.